Welcome back to our Sim Aero special series on CBTA. In episode 1, we defined the philosophy. Today, we get practical. You cannot just buy a CBTA manual and hope for the best. It requires a system. We call this the 3 pillars: course design, teaching and learning, and assessment. If you change one but ignore the others, the system fails. Before we dive into this though, Cédric, I ended the previous episode by mentioning resilience. You and I had a conversation about that in the post-podcast debrief. You were quite adamant that we need to speak about resilience a bit more. Can you elaborate on why?
Yes. Hello, Bryan. So indeed, everyone is talking about resilience in modern aviation, especially when discussing CBTA. First, the concept of resilience discussed here doesn't correspond to the initial historical, psychological concept of resilience linked to post-war trauma. It's rather its modern meaning, which can also be illustrated by perseverance, by fighting spirit, that never give up spirit. So the ability to recover from a difficulty in order to overcome the next one with the same strength and level. So what is the connection between resilience and CBTA? Well, it's quite simple. A pilot will only be competent if they are able to demonstrate perseverance throughout the events that may occur during the whole flight. One of the major challenges of the CBTA is therefore developing pilot resilience in order to make them competent. This concept is entirely new and doesn't appear in legacy training. So you're probably going to ask me, but how to develop pilot resilience in such a context, and therefore their competence? The direct link between resilience and competence is none other than confidence. So indeed, the entire purpose of the training component and new teaching method is to increase the pilot confidence or decrease in case of overconfidence, because we have also to take into account the case of overconfidence. And by improving this confidence, they will be able to react to all situations with the same intensity, the same level of performance, and thus demonstrate the full extent of their competence.
Yeah, it's nicely explained. I must say, I like it when there is a word like resilience. It's easy to understand. It's not a scientific word, and it's something that a pilot can work with. You can talk about resilience in a briefing, and everyone will sort of be on the same page. Thanks for that. Let's jump into the 3 pillars, starting with the first one, course design. Now, it sounds like course design is a major part of this process. It sounds like you need expertise to be a course designer. Can you elaborate on the first pillar, course design?
Yes, for sure. The course design differs in that it focuses on competencies and no longer necessary in compliance item or task, as we discussed during the first episode. This doesn't mean compliance no longer has a place in the course design. It's part of it, but it's not the main driving element.
When you say that, do you mean compliance with certain task exercises that are go back to our example of a steep turn and a V1 cut? Is that what you're talking about, compliance? Those need to be in the course?
Yes, exactly, because even if there is officially no framework, for instance, for a type rating, an OSD, it's an OSD, and we need to comply with the OSD of the manufacturer. So we have no choice, whether it's CBTA training or legacy training, even in CBTA. So if in the OSD, it say, okay, you have to necessarily work on this failure during the type rating. Even if we have CBTA, we have to work it. So we have to take into account. but we change the mindset we take into account. Thus, the CBTA design methodology is based on specific thing that is called instructional system design. And in the civilian pedagogical engineering side, there are a lot of different instructional system design, course design, and the one taken from CBTA is that we call the ADDIE model. So the ADDIE model is almost like a full cycle system with the first A meaning analyze. So we need first to analyze the training needs. What do you need? Then after, based on this first analysis, design the course. When we have designed the course, we can develop the associated material needed for instructor, for trainee, etc., etc. When these three pillars have been done, we can implement it, run the course, and after the end of the course, we need to evaluate the outcome of the course. And then after, the cycle starts again. Based on the data collected from the course, on the evaluation received, we can fine-tune, restart with analyze, etc., etc. And we can therefore see that this methodology is much more structured and coherent, performance-oriented than simply corresponding to compliance item or ticking the box task.
Yeah, because we're trying to achieve a specific output at the end. So in the old days, maybe just explain this for some of the non-pilots out there, you would have a matrix of tasks that need to be completed over a certain amount of sessions, and we would pick and choose what tasks get achieved in what session. Relatively easy to put together. And once it was done, it was done. I think there are a lot of training organizations that the program was built in the early 90s. It's probably still exactly the same. From what I can hear here, it's sort of ever evolving, because if you're evaluating your program, you start again, it just keeps, I suppose, getting better and better, and in turn, safer and safer.
Yes, of course, because once again, we are thinking in terms of competence and not in terms of task. And due to this fact, when you collect data about how pilots are able to demonstrate their competence. And due to the fact pilots are human being and not machine, necessary, you will have different output and different data. And based on this data analysis, you can identify in a certain specific population. It can depend on an airline, it can depend on an aircraft type, the strength of this population and the weaknesses on this population. And thus, if you want to be an efficient training organization, you have to renew your program based on the weaknesses you have identified in order, again, to improve the competency level of the pilot.
Yeah, and I'm sure people listening are starting to put the puzzle together in their head. And obviously the course design, it's not one of the questions that I originally planned on asking you, but let's just talk about that for a second, because it's such a key part of this entire philosophy. You're an expert in CBTA. That's why you're here speaking about it. I'm a pilot. I'm an instructor. I've been in the industry a long time. We spoke about your history into aviation a bit yesterday. Can we just go a little bit deeper into your journey into CBTA? Because I think there might be some other people listening around the world saying, I wouldn't mind being a subject matter expert on this, particularly if it's going to become the big thing we're saying it's going to be. Might be a bit of interest out there. How did you become a subject matter expert on this?
Yes. First, I had the chance to start my career in the French Air Force. And as an instructor in the French Air Force, I had this big chance to have evolving position. And especially in the instructor side of the French Air Force, you have different qualification purely from a pedagogical point of view. Meaning that, okay, being an instructor, for sure you need to be first a good pilot, but it's not enough. So that's why I had a lot of training about pure pedagogy. So that helped me first to handle the teaching and learning part that we will discuss later on. Then after, I had the huge chance to join Airbus in 2019. and this is what's just 1 year before the official, one of the major book was published by ICAO, which is the PANTS training, the 9868 document. And at that time, Airbus was very keen and very involved to this transition to CBTA. And from day one, when I joined Airbus, I was enrolled in this process and this transition. And I had the chance to meet a lot of people from IATA, because IATA, as we said yesterday, is pushing a lot for this, to perform a lot of workshop with other. At the very beginning, we were not subject matter expert because it was a new training paradigm, new training philosophy. So we sat together, we brainstormed together. We went to the ICAO, we discussed with ICAO, we discussed with airline, we discussed with everybody in order to set up this, to try to find practical aspect of this CBTA. And then after, as soon as this famous document, the PANTS training, came up, again, we will do the same thing. It's like how to translate this very theoretical document, but very good document, into practical aspect for airline.
So something I'm picking up there as well, and I'm sure you'll agree with me on this. You actually took the time to go and read that manual, and understand what it says. Yeah. And I think that's where a lot of the misconception is as well, because pilots, we like to fly, we like to be in the aircraft, but reading manuals and not our strong point all the time. So if you want to get involved, you have to actually understand it at the baseline level and then keep working your way through. We'll jump back into the course design part. If at Samero we're designing a course, let's start with a maneuver. Let's say engine failure after takeoff or a single engine go around. Do we start with the single engine go around, or do we start with the competency? So which one comes first here?
Once again, we have to remember that maneuver are basically tasks, and therefore they are only a tool for demonstrating one or more competencies. So thus, when we design a course, so this is again the first D of the ADDIE methodology, we don't think about maneuvers. And even we don't think about competencies at first, from the outset. The first thing we are thinking about is the training we are going to deliver. What is the pedagogical objective of this training? What are, in case of, if applicable, the sub-pedagogical objective? We need to think first in terms of word. Okay, what is the reason for this training? Based on this pedagogical objective, I say, okay, in order to achieve this objective, which competence do I have to develop and demonstrate? And only later on, I say, okay, I know what are the competencies I want to observe. I say, okay, what is the ramp up? I want to have the most efficient, but also a smooth path of competency ramp up to say, okay, I will not jump directly to situation awareness if I don't know my office.
Okay.
And once this competency ramp up has been done, then after I say, okay, now I have everything in terms of competence. Which tool will I use in order to demonstrate and to improve in those competencies? And this is where tasks come into the game.
And on the course building side, you're speaking about the competencies and the actual task. You're let's say a course builder, you building the courses for Samero. How involved would the instructors be, or the examiners in that course? Are they involved in any way? Do they come to you and say, look, we need to move this around or place something else in between this and that exercise? What role does the instructor play there?
They are still necessary involved in the training. The only one difference between what we can find more often right now it's purely pilot who design a course. Why? Because again, it's a list of tasks. This is very specific thing. Right now, due to clearly the teaching and learning pillar, etc., one important part of the course design can be delegated to a clearly pedagogical engineer. There is a lot of pedagogical process behind this. So, and even for which instructor and pilot are not trained for. You are a pilot, you are an instructor, you are a good instructor, you know the basic of teaching and learning, you know how to teach a trainee, but you are not being trained to be a pedagogical engineer.
Yeah.
So there is this new, I would say, new job which appear. However, a pedagogical engineer will never know which failure exactly will be the good one in order to tackle the good competencies at the right time, because they are not pilot. They don't know the aircraft. So right now in the course design, this is the good balance between pedagogical engineering and experience of a pilot, of a TRI, of an instructor to say, okay, this one, I want this mine at this time because I can guarantee you that if you do this in this situation, situation awareness, workload management, problem solving will be necessarily demonstrated.
Yeah, fully understood. It opens up my next question. So let's just talk about the instructor for a second. I'm an instructor. I've spent a decent amount of time instructing, and my approach to instruction has been very influenced by my past, my previous airline, what I've learned from my colleagues, talking to people at Simero, various instructors from both Simero and other airlines. And you develop this sort of toolkit. I've always encouraged young pilots in a debriefing, write down as much as you can, gather as much information you can. At the end of your career, you'll have a nice book of notes that might be useful to you one day. But point being, very influenced by what I've seen. I've also been on the receiving end of some poor instruction that I haven't adopted. And for me, that poor instruction felt like, myself and my fellow crew member at the time, a huge amount of anxiety, thrown at us, and the instructor sort of keeping really quiet, sort of facing the instructor operating station, not giving us a lot of input. And I've done my best to make sure I definitely don't bring that into the simulator. Point being, I'm very influenced by my own research and by who's instructed me in the past. The word instructor seems to even be being used a bit less and less when we talk about CBTA. Is the instructor still instructing, or is the instructor doing something else completely different? I've heard the word coaching thrown around as well. Can we talk about instructing, coaching, and where it's actually going? Because I'm sure there are some people listening that are going, okay, I'm an instructor, and if my company adopts CBTA, what am I going to be doing in the simulator?
Yes, very good question. In CBTA, instructors certainly still have the role of instructing, but it's also much more than that, and their role is quite comprehensive and important. This may seem strange to, as you mentioned, to many people, but today CBTA instructors are also referred to a coach. It's not just what I say. It's not what you say. It's not what I say. It's coming directly from ICAO. ICAO itself says it. Indeed, just as pilot competencies has been defined by ICAO, instructor competencies as defined by ICAO. And as we said yesterday, we have observable behavior for pilot, and I have also defined instructor observable behavior. And one of them is clearly coach the trainee. So one expected instructor behavior is coach the trainee. So what does this mean? I think I would jump a bit, go side about aviation. The best way to illustrate it is to draw a parallel with the world of sports.
Because when you use coaching here, the first thing I think about is sport. But before you get there, don't lose your train of thought, because I want to go back to it. But I must say, I prefer coaching. I prefer that term, because that is actually what we are doing. You are working with the crew member to achieve, nowadays with CBTA, these competencies at the end. But instructing is almost too harsh. I prefer the word coaching, I must say.
Yeah, exactly. Indeed, what is the role of a coach for an athlete? Is not the one who going to dive into the pool to win the Olympic Games. The coach is side of the pool. But his role is to understand his athlete, the strengths of the athlete, the weaknesses, the areas of improvement, and in order to be able to work on it and to achieve in the end the best performance, the best possible performance. Similarly, a coach pushes an athlete to question themselves. The role of a coach is to say, okay, question yourself on this, this, and this. Why? You have to find the solution by your own, because if you find the solution by your own, you will be even better.
Mm-hmm.
In this case, in CBTA, it's exactly the same thing. Adapting to the training, working for them, identifying and understanding their strengths, their areas of improvement, and encouraging them to find by their own the solution to improve and thus become competent. So in other words, today the instructor must ensure that the trainee become the driving force behind their own training. I would say a famous quote says, explain, I will remember. Involve me, I will understand.
Yeah, for sure. If we stick with your analogy of coaching and in sport, how critical is a good coach in sport? I mean, I'm a South African, so rugby mad. We've got the best rugby coach we've ever had, and the results that we're seeing on the rugby field, that there's no surprise that we're getting the best results we've ever had. But you can go, you look at football, Alex Ferguson, a coach can make or break a team. Certainly can make or break an individual if you take individual sport like tennis or something. So if we are going to go down this coaching route, we got to make sure that the coaching that the crew members are getting is on point.
Yeah.
You can have a good coach, that's great, but you don't want a bad coach because it's going to affect you terribly. So let's move on to a little bit of a controversial part. If it's called CBTA, and the A stands for assessment. Now, how do we assess communication or leadership? They sound a bit like personality traits, and are we trying to assess this personality? Is it a personality contest? What happens if I'm friends with one of the crew members? I know he's a nice guy, so automatically he gets my tick box of he wins the personality contest against the guy he's sitting next to who I don't know.
Yeah. I will answer the question by reverting. I will answer your question by giving you a question. According to you, so because we are talking about assessment, can you define what is assessment? Tell me what is assessment according to you.
So trying to, assessing the crew member against a specific standard that is set and any deviation from that. So in my mind, you've got a standard that is laid out, and how did the crew member deviate, either positively or negatively from that standard? That's how I think about it.
Yes. Okay. And how the standard is defined?
Well, the standard is defined in my head, I suppose. And that goes back to my original question about what I've learned in the past.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've had an instructor that was absolutely pedantic about landing on the center line early in my career. And it's had a positive impact on my flying for my whole career because it's something I always concentrated on. And I'd be in the simulator and a pilot would land to the left or right to the center line. And when I would debrief on this, almost shocked that I've never been told this before, didn't think it was such a big deal. The ERJ-145 is not the widest aircraft in the world, so why can't I land to the side? But it's my standard that I have that I'm sort of transferring to the crew members.
Yeah. And yes, this is exactly where subjectivity starts. When the instructor has to refer to his own experience to define his standard and his expectation. To come back to my question, what is assessment? The answer is quite simple. Assessment is defined by a comparison between what I'm currently observing and what I want to observe. Meaning, in other words, what I observe compared to my expectation. And this is where we begin the mandatory interconnection between the three pillars. Why? If my course design doesn't clearly define my expectation for the target competency for a specific thing, I won't have an objective point of comparison.
Mm-hmm.
So what would be my basis? My basis will be my own experience. By my experience, as you mentioned in your previous example, my experience is not yours.
Yeah.
So as an instructor, because maybe sometimes one day I've been shocked by an event, I say, okay, no, you have to learn, especially pay attention. It's purely on the run rate center line. Say, okay, my expectation is this one. So you will assess even if you assess according to certain competencies, but competencies linked to your expectation, maintaining run rate center line, etc., etc. And in the end, for sure, the collected data will be subjective because it's based on your experience. So that's why this interconnection between pillars is so important, because this is thanks to the course design that you will have the objective expectation. Your role as an instructor is not to guess by your own what I'm supposed to observe for this task or for this exercise. This is a standard that has to be defined for everybody, for the same session, for you and for me or for another instructor tomorrow. If I go in the simulator for the same session on the same aircraft, your expectation has to be the same as mine. So it has to be defined earlier.
Yeah, defined earlier in the process, made very clear to everyone what that standard is, and then you're working with the same toolkit, instructor to instructor.
Exactly.
Which is more scalable, it's more consistent, it can be consistent through different simulator centers, it can be consistent through different airlines. Makes a lot of sense. Observable behaviors. Can you give me a concrete example of an observable behavior for a specific competency?
Yes. So we begin to answer this question in our first podcast. Observable behavior is an inseparable combination of, this is what we said yesterday, knowledge, skills, and attitude. And it is these same behaviors that allow me to demonstrate my competence. We cannot objectively know what is the weight of each of these KSA elements in an observable behavior. It's not possible, but again, it's not the goal. Okay? I observe or I do not observe. This is factual. This is factual and objective. Whatever the weight of the knowledge, whatever the skills, whatever the attitude, I know that I have observed. I'm an instructor. Okay, it's a guideline. I have to observe this or this. So the instructor role becomes identifying why it isn't observed, finding the root cause of this omission, but fundamentally, this observation remains factual and effective. So to come back on your question, a concrete example of observable behavior will be the following. In the situation awareness competency, one of the observable behavior is monitor and assesses the aircraft's energy state and its anticipated flight path. Therefore, if a trainee demonstrates the ability to manage their aircraft energy state, especially during approach, for instance, and demonstrate also the capacity to anticipate the aircraft trajectory based on the aircraft energy state, in the end, they say, okay, you have demonstrated part of the situation awareness I'm expecting from you. And sometimes this is why, again, this is a point we will discuss later on, instructor standardization is so important. Because if you ask like this to a lot of instructors, okay, energy state, what is it? A lot of them are going to say, oh, it's piloting skills. No. But energy state, energy management is not piloting your aircraft. It's be aware of what your aircraft is doing.
A little bit like if you, just staying with this analogy and trying to bring it into the pilots here, if you're on a final approach and you're looking at your TCAS system and you've got a good sort of overview of what the traffic looks like on final approach, could we say that a good pilot observing good observable behavior characteristics is taking into account more? I think ATC is going to slip me in behind this aircraft. I better start slowing down now, as opposed to someone else who's just cracking on at a decent speed that hasn't got this big picture yet and gets himself in trouble and ends up having to orbit or something like that. Because we see this all the time with flying.
Yeah.
And to some pilots, it's totally natural. They can see the picture. They understand what ATC is going to do, and they make the change before it happens. You can even demonstrate this in a very simple way in the flight deck by knowing what frequency you're going to change to next. If you, as an example, moving from, Cape Town East to Cape Town West, 1247, I know the next frequency I'm going to need is 125.1. So it's in the box there, ready to go. You're always one step ahead of the aircraft.
Exactly. And this is why this new training system and this new training paradigm is so powerful, because what you are mentioning is the perfect example what we used to have for decades. But the problem is right now, most of the time, there are two solutions. Either say, okay, you are done piloting your aircraft, or for good instructor to try to link this behavior to what you mentioned yesterday, airmanship. But the problem is, okay, today, I don't have the tool to officially fail a pilot because there are lack of situational awareness, because, okay, situational awareness is not part of the theoretical assessment. Right now, you have the tool to say, okay, you fail your type rating because you are not situation aware. And because you don't manage, you don't anticipate. And anticipation is one of the main elements of the situation awareness. But right now, you have the right to fail somebody because he didn't anticipate.
Situational awareness is such a important big topic, and you're totally right. So you can't go and put a cross by situational awareness at the moment and a type rating gets failed. You'd have to have tasks that were failed or not completed, which are, those tasks are probably, well, they definitely are carrying way less importance than situational awareness.
Yeah, and again, this is where course design become important, because if you no longer think in terms of CAD but in terms of competence and pedagogical objective, it's very simple. Meaning that during a type rating course, you will observe all competencies, the 9-1. But what is the most important? Okay, you will have communication. Are you sure communication is that we call a special emphasis for type rating? No, because for type rating, the goal is to learn a new aircraft, be efficient on your new aircraft, so you will focus on application of procedure, these kind of things. But now, for common course, is it application of procedure the most important thing? No. For common course, you are looking for leadership, teamwork, problem-solving, decision-making, situation awareness. So based on this, you say, okay, the goal of my common course is to work on this. So I will create scenario which focuses exactly on this one. So again, it clearly depends on the objective you want to set up.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So from course to course, we're actually looking at different observable behaviors, different competencies for certain things. Yeah. Type rating, totally different to a command upgrade course or even an airline assessment or something like that.
So even during a type rating, you will be in a position to observe leadership, teamwork, because you are going to manage unforeseen situation. So as soon as, even as a first officer, when you are managing an unforeseen situation, you are supposed to demonstrate part of the leadership, teamwork, etc., etc. But this is not the point on which you're going to focus. If there is an outcome of safety, for sure, you cannot say, okay, it's not the goal, I will forget the leadership and teamwork. But this is not a point on which you're going to insist a lot. But in the opposite thing, in common course, for sure, this is the point on which you're going to focus.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Very, very interesting. It's a very positive thing. And I think that the benefit out of, we mentioned the two different courses there, type rating and command upgrade, you'll now get the full benefit out of the course that you're actually doing because the focus is in the right direction. So CBTA, Cédric, is a full package deal. The next episode, we're going to tackle the elephant in the room, confusion. Why do so many smart aviation professionals struggle with this transition? We'll look at the myths regarding subjectivity and safety standards. I'm Bryan Rosevear, joined by Cédric Coffignal. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Bryan.